Welcome to the RideShare Guy podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry, straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
All right, Dan Bratshpis is the CEO and co-founder of Inshur, a New York-based next-gen data-led technology insurtech that enables drivers to obtain quotes and receive coverage in minutes. So Inshur has been around for a while, and it's a company that I'm really excited to learn more about. And there's probably no better person than the CEO and co-founder. So Dan, I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, how long has Inshur been around for?
So yeah, we started late 2016. We kind of rolled out our first product in 2017. So it's been a couple of years now.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's been more than a couple, in the rideshare industry. It's funny, right? Because 5 years is really like 15 or 20 years. Most companies don't make it that long. So at the most basic level, you guys are already off to a great start. You're still around and still growing.
Absolutely. Yep.
So for those who may not be familiar with Inshur and the product line, tell us a little bit, about the company. Maybe start, with that first product and kind of, slowly where you guys are at now.
Yeah, so our first product was geared towards professional drivers in the rideshare space in New York, and we launched that in late 2016, early 2017, and then we sort of expanded since then to a couple of new other markets. So we're now in Europe as well, in the UK and mainland Europe. But that's kind of how we got our start, is in the sort of professional. I mean, the New York City market is quite different than the rest of the US.
Yeah.
So the professional drivers is what we've been geared to since the early days.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about New York for a second, because I think it is, one of the biggest transportation markets in the world. Uber and Lyft are doing, I think mid to high hundreds of thousands of trips per day. And, I think it's interesting to put that in context, right? Because it's like, you can casually say, oh, they're doing hundreds of thousands of trips a day. But I mean, there are a lot of drivers in New York, and there are a lot of specifically, rideshare and Uber and Lyft and for hire drivers. So what's it like, what is the driving situation like in New York, and, how does Inshur fit into that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's one of the largest transportation capitals in the world. I think it's the largest in the U.S. Yeah, I think it's always been a unique place with a lot more regulations than probably other markets. I think you tend to find more professional drivers that kind of do this full time, and they use it as a means to put food on the table.
Yeah.
It's a big immigrant community, so there's lots of immigrant drivers, and you have tons of immigrant families from all over the world kind of coming to New York, and rideshare is a path to prosperity for a lot of them. Obviously, the pandemic's had an impact. I'm sure you know that. The rideshare market, along with passenger transportation, I think has ebbed and flowed over the last couple of years. But I think it is still, sort of a mecca when it comes to tourism. And folks needing to get around. So it's still there's still tons and tons of trips happening in New York every day.
Yeah. So why did Inshur pick New York City for that first product and launch?
So it's something that's been kind of near and dear to me. And so maybe I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I landed here. So yeah, I mean, I started my career on Wall Street. I'm a New Yorker. Been living here for quite some time. And my family are immigrants, and I came as a little kid to the US, so a lot of my family has kind of driven a cab to get to the American dream. And so passenger transportation has always kind of held this place in my heart, because like any immigrant, regardless of who they are, regardless of language or education, can get a start and kind of make a living in the transportation space. So I had someone in my family invest in a little insurance agency that catered to passenger transportation risks. And they asked me if I could come and check this out. And what I saw was, this was around 2016. There was tons of Uber and Lyft drivers entering the market at that point. And I just thought, the way by which they had to get their insurance was often misunderstood. It was just slow and barbaric. And we wanted to bring transparency and technology and customer service to the market. And I think we've done that.
Yeah. I mean, I think when people think about insurance companies, obviously you think about usually not so great interactions, right? Like it's not that fun getting a new quote. It's not that fun getting into an accident, actually, especially for Uber and Lyft drivers, it's a terrible situation because you have to deal with the accident, but also now your main, option for making money is now in the shop, right? So it's sort of like a double whammy in that sense. And, I think it's interesting too in New York, right? Like you mentioned, a lot of drivers are full time and need to be licensed. So I know insurance, for example, is much more expensive in New York just at a baseline, right? I mean, what are like some of the typical costs or baselines are we looking at here for like the average, commercial Uber and Lyft driver in New York City?
Yeah, so depending on your driving record and the type of vehicle you drive, you're
Hmm.
looking anywhere between like low 3,000s to maybe 4,000 per year. And if you
Yeah.
have multiple drivers in your car, that may sort of go up. If you're driving sort of an expensive vehicle like a Tesla, your full coverage may cost you a bit more than that. But that's kind of the range that you're talking about, $3,000 is sort of the range.
Yeah. So what specifically was there one, you talked about this encounter. Was that what sort of made you start Insure, or what kind of gave you the impetus to really kind of say, hey, this is a problem, but not only this is a problem, but this is something I need to fix?
Yeah, so witnessing the way by which these drivers had to get their insurance just
Hmm.
seemed very barbaric to me. It
Yeah.
was mostly done through pen and paper, through specialty brokers, and the process was just super, super slow, super analog. And I felt like there was sort of a calling, right? Because a lot of these drivers felt like they were getting ripped off. The brokers would
Yeah.
take advantage of them. There would be all sorts of fees and sort of add-ons that they weren't aware of. And I just wanted to sort of bring fairness and ease of use and transparency to the marketplace. So today our motto is to make insurance fair and easy.
Hmm.
We've since expanded away from just doing rideshare in New York, but that's sort of the motto by which we live on. And yeah, I mean, this to me was the calling and the impetus for just let's bring some technology, let's make things quick. There's
Yeah.
no reason why these drivers should have to come to niche brokers and fill out stacks of forms.
Yeah.
So I just thought this was a massive opportunity for us.
Yeah. Well, I think especially too, anytime you hear or see paperwork, like physical, actual paperwork being done, there's usually some sort of opportunity to improve or disrupt or make things more efficient. In your mind, is there one thing that stands out that you hear from the drivers that you're talking to or your customers at Insure? Is there one reason why they're coming to you and they're saying, hey, wow, these guys are the cheapest or these guys have the best customer service? I'm sure you feel that there are a lot of positive aspects of your business, but what if there is one thing? What's the one thing that you think your customers really care about?
Yeah, so we're definitely not the cheapest. We're definitely not the most expensive. We try to be
Hmm.
sort of fair in our pricing. I'd say the reason why most customers come to us is it's fair and it's easy, right?
Yeah.
It's quick. We make it super simple enough for these drivers to understand the coverage.
Hmm.
Insurance is complicated. Most people don't
Right.
know what coverages they have. I've been doing this for some time and I still get confused by all the terminology. So it's a
Yeah.
complicated industry and we don't make it easy on ourselves. So we just try to be simple and fair and quick, and sort of the ease of use, I'd say, is the number one factor here.
Yeah. And what makes it easy? I mean, for example, I believe you guys have an app that I think drivers can download. I don't know too many, like you said, I'm guessing most of the time these drivers in New York City have to go to an office or fill in pen and paper. Can you talk about some of the specifics that make it fair and easy?
Yeah, absolutely. So in New York, you can download our app if you're a professional driver.
Hmm.
You scan your professional license. You can link we have partnerships with a few rideshare platforms that we
Hmm.
work with. You can link your platform account with our
Cool.
app, and we can confirm coverage for those platforms. And so a lot of times we know which vehicle you're driving.
Hmm.
We know, and we're sort of able to give you a quote within, I think 2 minutes is our fastest time to sort of
Yeah.
get a quote and purchase a policy. So this can actually be done super, super quickly.
Got it. That's cool. So, what types of drivers are using Insure at the moment? I mean, you mentioned it sounds like New York City is a big market. Is it, beyond? I guess there's geography, but I guess there's also, there's certain types of drivers, full time versus part time, or what have you found?
Yeah, so for us, we've been focusing on the professional segment.
Okay.
We're in New York, we're in the UK, so London's our second biggest market.
Hmm.
We have an offering in Amsterdam and mainland Europe. But in the rideshare segment, professional drivers is what we've been focusing on.
Yeah.
Later this year, we're going to be launching a new sort of more an insurance product geared towards the more sort of gig economy type driver. And that's going to have different type of coverages and different sort of features in terms of what we cover that we're pretty excited about. So that's kind of the rideshare segment. We also have a product for last mile delivery drivers that's currently live in the UK, and it's coming soon to the US as well. And soon we'll be launching a contractor product. So for your plumber or electrician or some, the professional contractors is the next product for us.
Very cool. So definitely want to talk about the last mile delivery product in a second here, because obviously that has sort of exploded over the past 2 years with the pandemic and all of those goings ons. But if we stick to the drivers and the professional segment, I mean, I think that's an interesting, sort of anecdote. You're not anecdote, but, sort of focus for you guys, right? Because like when a lot of people think of Uber drivers, I think they probably think more of someone like me, right? Someone who has driven for UberX since 2014. I signed up from my couch. I use my own regular car. I signed up with my personal insurance, and then at one point had rideshare insurance. And when I stopped driving during the pandemic, switched back to personal insurance, right? And I think that's what most people think of. But in New York City, it's different, right? Because of the rules and the regulations, and so you sort of need to be an actual professional driver. Do you have any thoughts on sort of the difference there, or have you run into confusion there with drivers who want to insure, but maybe they're just a regular UberX driver in Los Angeles, for example?
Yeah, so I mean, we target. We're not in California yet, so we don't really advertise to LA drivers. But I hear what you're saying. We are geared towards the professional drivers in New York. These folks need professional licenses. They need a certain amount of minimum coverage that's dictated by their sort of regulatory body, and it's really the same in Europe as well. It's sort of regulated in the same way. And we make it super simple and clear to those drivers how they can get the best coverage possible in the easiest way. The gig economy product that we'll be launching soon will hopefully allow someone like you, Harry, to get the Inshur app and get a quote from us, and hopefully we can convince you to purchase a policy from us.
Yeah. Well, I am curious how you sort of think about the differences between the professional driver segment and the gig economy driver. I mean, I'm assuming there's some, like with everything in life, probably some pros and some cons. With the number one thing, I guess, to me would be like the policies are a lot lower, right? For like the gig driver, right? Like my insurance, that I pay to Geico or whoever I use right now, I want to say is like, oh gosh, I don't even know. I'm on auto pay. That's how bad it is, right? But like $500 or $600 every 6 months. Does that sound about right?
Yep.
Versus, you talking about, $3,000 to $4,000 a year. So that'd be $1,500 to $2,000 every 6 months. Does that have a big impact for your guys' bottom line?
So I think, the markets that we're talking about, the coverage is quite different, right? So in LA, the platform that you work on, like Uber and Lyft, will provide coverage while you're on the app. The professional drivers will not have coverage from the platform they work on, and so we provide primary coverage. So the exposure is much, much larger. When we do sort of focus on the more gig economy driver, the exposure will be lower, right? So we will plug the gaps that exist that I'm sure I've seen tons of articles that have clearly explained by the RideShare Guy.
Well, I don't know how clearly they are, because let's be honest, insurance is a bit confusing, but we try to make it as clear as possible. And I like the way you put it. The exposure is much larger, right? Because I think we hear from media articles that insurance is a very costly part of the business for Uber and Lyft, and it's not really a cost that drivers see directly, but I mean it is kind of coming out of their bottom line. And so I imagine that if that difference between what I'm paying right now and what Uber is paying, right, if they can somehow sort of get a better deal, or if I can get rewarded for being a better driver, the one thing that always like pains me is that we recommend to all our drivers that they have a dash cam, but you really don't get any benefit from that from your insurance company, even though it is a huge benefit in my opinion, right? It seems like there's a good opportunity there to sort of get rewarded for that coverage that Uber and Lyft are kind of paying for everyone for right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, on the dash cam piece, we do have a discount for dash cam, so we definitely take that into account. And it's been, it's been great. For the drivers that do have dash cams, we find that it's great to have access to that video footage. And at the time of the accident, it actually prevents claims to some extent. But you're absolutely right. I think, I think the pricing models that the platforms have hopefully take into account the cost of insurance. So obviously a policy in New York costs a little bit different than a policy in Omaha. And I'm hoping that the rates that these platforms kind of offer the drivers take that into account to some extent.
Yeah. Do you find, I mean, maybe I would like to know if you agree with this statement or not first, and then if so, you could explain it. But, I feel like to me, like, why is insurance so expensive in ride hail, for Uber and Lyft drivers in the, sort of for hire professional driver category in general? To me, it seems like it's very expensive. So love to know if you agree with that statement. And if so, why is that the case?
It's a great question, Harry, and I think it's all a function of exposure and sort of, if you take a look at a professional driver in New York, and the number of trips and miles that a driver does on the streets of New York per mile, they're a much safer driver than sort of me that's doing this, a couple times a day. But you're still on the road and things happen, accidents happen, right? And so the fact that you're putting a lot of mileage, there's a lot of trips, plus in a crowded sort of city environment, like there's pedestrians and bicyclists, you have passengers in the back. And we live in a world where, lawyers love to sue one another. And if you're in a ride hail, vehicle and you have a logo like Uber and Lyft, lawyers love to take on those cases. And so it's just a litigious society that we live in. And that drives the cost of insurance up. We'd love nothing more than to offer lower cost policies, but it's just a function of how much these claims cost to settle, and the medical expenses as well are super expensive. So that all kind of comes into the price of the insurance policy.
Yeah. Well, the lawyers piece is definitely interesting. I mean, I don't know what it's like in New York, but I feel like in LA, not every block, but definitely every few blocks on some of the main areas, you see different advertisements, injured in a rideshare accident or call an Uber Lyft attorney. So I imagine, this is obviously big business. I am curious though, do you think that is, I don't know if you need to know a percentage offhand, but is that, like ballpark 25%, 55%, 50% of the cost? Like, because the first thing you described would be more of the cost of the exposure, right? Like you mentioned, right? Just, hey, as a driver, you're driving in busy cities, you're driving at night, you're driving with lots of pedestrians in busy areas, and you're just going to get into accidents, right? Because you're putting so many miles on the road. So that's sort of like one component to me. And then the second component might be more things that are, kind of like an unfortunate part of the business, maybe where, you're just a target and someone wants to sue you, basically. I guess I'm curious, like that latter part, is that like a meaningful part of what goes into the cost, or is it kind of just like an annoyance?
Yeah, I mean, I can't give you an exact number, but it's a significant part of the cost of insurance. And I'd say it's a significant part of all auto insurance, not just rideshare insurance. So we see it in the personal auto insurance space as well. It's just that you're not driving hundreds of thousands of miles every year. And if you were, your prices would probably, with passengers in the back, if you were, your prices would probably be closer to what a rideshare policy would be.
Yeah. So it sounds like, and this has sort of always been my theory, I'm glad you sort of confirmed it for me, is that, I mean, driving for hire is kind of just, an expensive business, right? I mean, on a lot of fronts, right? Putting a lot of miles on your car, it costs a lot, right? You're also, driving a lot of miles, and, the exposure risk therefore means more accidents. And, another thing too, that I'm curious to get your take on is I feel like some of the incentives are kind of sometimes, frankly, like geared less towards safe driving. Like there aren't a lot of companies that actually offer you a benefit for having a dash cam. Inshur might be one of the, only ones or very few ones that do it. If anything, I would say the incentives are kind of the opposite way, right? Because a lot of these drivers get paid per mile, they get paid per minute. So they're sort of incentivized to drive as fast as possible. We're here in wintertime right now where, a lot of places are snowing, and, drivers, the savvy ones who follow our stuff at least know that this can be a good time to drive, because a lot more people, drivers aren't driving during snowstorms and blizzards and stuff like that, but it's very dangerous to drive during those times. So you got to make sure you're prepared and have snow tires and four-wheel drive and all that. But, I just sort of think about some of the incentives, right? And where you can make the most and how you can make the most. And it kind of leads me to think that, there's some probably inverse correlation to, premiums or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
accidents.
I think there are definitely ways to make the incentives aligned with the risk. I think the insurance industry overall doesn't do a great job of that, and we're here to solve that, right? So we're working on making insurance more usage-based. Like, if a driver does 1,000 trips a month, there's no reason why they should be the same price as someone that does, 200 trips a month, right? And so you're absolutely right. I think we as an industry need to do more to align those incentives, and that's something we're spending a lot of time thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Usage based is a good example. And I think that's one that I've heard, folks in the insurance industry mention before. I think the old school sort of method of doing it was kind of, more flat rate. But like you said, right, 200 versus 1,000 miles is a big difference. Are there any other opportunities you think of? Like to me, I don't know, maybe day versus night driving. If I'm someone who only drives during the day, right? Like a lot of people in our audience don't like dealing with the pukers, Friday and Saturday night. And so they only drive during the day. And I imagine, it's a lot safer to drive during the day than Friday, Saturday night, bar rush, and, people and drunk drivers and all that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a ton of advances in the telematics space, and this is an
Mm,
area we're looking to kind of integrate into our insurance offering. Um, but you're absolutely right. We can use your driving behavior, and if you're spending time in crowded, sort of pedestrian areas, that
mm,
may be different from someone that kind of drives on rural roads. And nighttime versus daytime, I'm sure those are correlated with different risks, and so
yeah.
this is definitely an area we want to start exploring.
Got it. So so it sounds like these are areas that you're looking into the future and exploring. Are there any other areas that you kind of take into account right now that is maybe unique or kind of stands out or is kind of on the cutting edge of, what other insurance carriers are doing?
Yeah, so a lot of it kind of comes down to insurance regulations, and
Mm,
I'd say there's some jurisdictions that the insurance regulators are much more open to innovation and trying new things
mm,
versus others. Um, and so I'd say in our European markets, we do a lot of interesting things around actually looking at the exposure and number of trips and where the drivers sort of operate and kind of slicing and dicing
yeah.
the risks in that way, because to us we want we want to offer like the fair price to every single driver. And so if
Right.
somebody's doing 10 times more trips, they're obviously going to pay a higher price than someone that may not be using their vehicle as
Hmm.
much. And so this is definitely something we're aiming to do. Dash cams have been a big success for
Mm,
us. We use that in New York. I'd say 50% of our drivers right now have dash cams installed. And we use that for not only reducing sort of claims payouts, but also defending our drivers, right? A lot of times you have staged accidents and you have people
mm.
saying, oh, I was hit by a certain vehicle, and you look at the video footage and it turns out actually that's not the case. So I think it's super important. I would advise every rideshare driver, if you're doing this full time, to get a dash cam. I think this is an important
Yeah.
piece of kit.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I'm definitely, I think it's one of my number one recommendations in my book and our courses for drivers when they're first getting after a phone mount. I think phone mount, then dash cam, because obviously there's the insurance aspect, but I mean, even, for bad passenger behavior, because that's the other thing. And I guess it's less kind of on the insurance side, but, just more of the sort of being a good driver and, having a good experience as a driver. And I'm curious on your guys' end, obviously doing a lot of work with drivers. Are there things beyond, the insurance relationship that you have? Like, I mean, the dash cam is kind of a good example, right? Like, I imagine that you love the dash cam because it saves on the insurance side of things, but there's probably also the opportunity to tell all the drivers, hey, this is a great way to prevent bad passenger behavior. Or if you do have some encounter, that it's on film, and maybe you guys don't do this yet, but we've got a partnership with Uber and Lyft, and we can help you facilitate. If a rider accuses you of doing something, and you've got it all on footage, right? I think there's kind of cool opportunities like that. So I'm curious, if you guys have explored any of that.
Yeah, so we have a newsletter that we send to all of our customers and prospects. So I'd encourage all sort of drivers to sign up at inshur.com for our newsletter. And we publish tips all the time about, right now it's kind of focused on the professional areas that I mentioned, but
Hmm.
we publish tips to drivers around what they should be kind of thinking about. In fact, we have a new report coming out around sort of the effects of the pandemic and
Mm,
sort of electric vehicles and how the impact for rideshare. And so absolutely, like, we have tons of interesting stuff in the newsletter. One sort of funny example, maybe not so funny, is kind of places where you can park and use the bathroom. So we have a
yeah,
map of where drivers can actually stop in New York City, because believe it or not, it's kind of tough when you're
yeah,
working 8 hours a day finding a spot.
definitely.
Definitely tons of tips out there, and I'd encourage everyone to sign up.
Yeah, we even, I mean, we've definitely covered that issue before, and I think we worked with a company. I want to say they were called Stop to Go or stop something to go, but it was basically an app where you could reserve a bathroom for that very reason. And I mean, frankly, this is one of the complaints we've heard over the past couple of years with, a lot of restaurants and places that you could pop into before to use the bathroom really quickly, are now closed or only allow for pickup at the window, so you can't actually use that bathroom. So definitely, some of these issues that drivers face on the ground, that, I wouldn't say it's funny like you said, but it is, kind of like something you might not realize, right? Like, hey, need somewhere to go use the restroom. It is a big issue, and it kind of is a perfect segue because one of the last things I want to talk to you is this explosion in last mile delivery. And that's one of the things we've seen is less places for drivers to go to the bathroom. You guys are launching a product around last mile delivery. How do you guys think about at Inshur think about last mile delivery, and kind of in the context of what you're doing with for hire drivers? Do you look at it as different, similar, related segment? What are you guys thinking?
So it's definitely a related segment. We definitely saw in our markets that we cover, the drivers would sort of, especially during the pandemic, switch to more last mile delivery usage of their vehicle. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it, but I imagine there's a segment of drivers that kind of switch from one to the other. And so we began offering our last mile delivery product last year, and it's been a great success. So we cover food and parcel delivery drivers, both four-wheeled and two-wheeled. Right now it's only live in the UK, but we're going to be launching that soon in the US as well. From an insurance point of view, it's a lower cost product. When you carry a pizza, it's definitely there's less things to cover than a human in the back of your vehicle. But nevertheless, you're still using your vehicle professionally. You're still doing lots of trips, and so I think there's a lot of correlations in terms of both driver segments and the risk as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's what we've found, and definitely makes sense. That there's less, I guess, liability in one way, right? Because you don't ever have passengers. You ruin a $20 pizza, it's a lot different than $1 million lawsuit when you have two passengers in the back. I mean, obviously, you are still putting miles on your car and driving in busy times and places. So I guess if you hit someone else, there could be liability, one way instead of two ways, I guess. But I guess one thing I've seen in the delivery, it seems like a lot of the platforms don't actually offer much or any coverage. It's very limited, seems like, for these delivery platforms, right? So like we've gotten some kind of unfortunate stories from drivers who are, out delivering and, they report an accident while on some platform, and it turns out like they had no coverage. They were en route, to pick up a pizza, but there was no coverage during that. And there was limited coverage when they're delivering the pizza. And, it definitely seems, not as robust as what you get with Uber and Lyft, in most places.
Yeah, so Harry, I think you've done an amazing job on your website kind of outlining the insurance coverages for the different platforms. You're absolutely right that in the food and parcel delivery space, not everyone provides that period 1, 2, and 3 coverage that you kind of have grown accustomed to in the rideshare space. And, the one thing I would tell all drivers is like, check your personal auto insurance policies. Most personal auto insurance policies do not cover professional use of your vehicle. And when you're delivering a pizza or McDonald's, that is professional use of your vehicle. And there are coverage gaps that exist there, and it could cause tons of liability issues for drivers. They can be personally affected if they own any sort of assets or home. Those are exposed, and these are absolutely the gaps that we're looking to plug with our new product in the US.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm kind of excited about the new products like this that are covering delivery folks. Because obviously, this industry has expanded. I would say more than expanded; it's exploded in the past 2 years. And I've been doing this for a while. Even longer than you guys at Inshur, since 2014. And I kind of remember in those early days, it was kind of like this with rideshare, right? Your personal policy didn't cover you as a rideshare driver, but there was even more risk. I mean, I guess the one pushback we've heard from delivery drivers is that it's like, frankly, like they tell me it's a lot harder to get caught, and I'm pretty sure that that's not a good thing, if they're getting into accidents and not reporting it. But that's also kind of the reality of the situation, right? But I mean, I think like you said, if you've got assets at risk, or like really, you kind of want to understand like what you're getting yourself into. But I mean, it definitely seems like in the delivery community, they either don't know or kind of don't care when it comes to getting like professional insurance.
Yeah, and this comes back to sort of our vision of protecting and empowering prosperity for those that drive the world forward. So we're here to kind of make it super simple for these drivers to plug those coverage gaps and not have to reinvent the wheel and explain what is covered and what is not covered. And I think I would advise everyone to kind of take a look at their sort of insurance gaps. I'm sort of an insurance nerd now, but it's a big problem, and I wouldn't want anyone to be in that situation.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and chatting all about Inshur. Before we go and before you tell us where we can find, I want to give you opportunity to help me with my new segment where you get to ask me one question. So if there's any burning question on your mind, go for it. You can ask me and I'll answer, and then we'll give the final plug for Inshur.
Absolutely. So I think I'd love to hear from you. What are sort of the biggest changes that you've seen in the rideshare industry since the early days versus today, given that you've been in the industry since the very early days?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's a tough question because it's almost like where do I start? And I think one of the biggest things that we've seen is, frankly, at the start, I think driving for hire. If we sort of focus on driving, it was kind of a almost, I would say, like sexy job. It was a fun job. It was a high earning job, right? And there's definitely been the complaints over time, that pay has gotten worse, that rates have gotten lower. But I think at the same time, a lot of the sort of ancillary benefits that you might think companies like Uber and Lyft would add, things like driver loyalty, a better onboarding experience for new drivers, right? Some of these sort of things that I'm sure are on their product roadmap at some point, they just haven't been that high of a priority, right? So you sort of have this like kind of declining experience, and some of these really low hanging fruit opportunities to, counterbalance some of that haven't really been done. You can kind of look at like the perfect example as we highlighted this story of one of our drivers, Jay Crater, who has 25,000 Uber and Lyft trips in San Francisco, 4.99 star rating. This guy's a top driver, does a ton of articles and videos, really popular guy that used to do content for us. And he had this very simple like DMV issue on his background check, and Uber temporarily deactivated him.
Wow.
And basically he was kind of on his own, a top driver, really, and I'm sure he's a valuable driver to them too, right? And it's just like, what organization, does that happen? Like where you don't get priority customer service, you can't get someone on the phone, or, someone can't, not only because I think I think they actually want to get him back on the platform, but B, just, as sort of a mirror, it's like the right thing to do, like you work with a lot of for hire drivers, and like for a lot of people, this is their livelihood, right? So getting deactivated, much less deactivated for a reason that's beyond your control, or an error, or a false passenger accusation that says, you weren't wearing your mask, for example, and, you've got 20,000 trips on Uber and a 4.9 star rating, you're not going to sacrifice, your whole driving career, right, for one little situation. That's sort of where I've sort of been disappointed, but that's kind of also one of the biggest, kind of changes I've seen is that, the experience kind of, it hasn't lived up to like some of that initial hype. And I think some of the easy opportunities that I'm sure the companies will eventually add haven't come as quickly, right? So frankly, I don't think it's as good of a job as it used to be, or could have been, even though some of the aspects that I really love, like the flexibility and, being able to get paid same day, and, even after a single job in some cases, right? There are some really glaring positives, right? But, I still think the positives outweigh the negatives, but, definitely that's been one of the disappointments for me, right? And I guess people that are brand new to the job, they may not know about that, but I've been doing it for 8 years, so I know about it.
Got it. Maybe that's the next one for the segment with Dara then.
Exactly. No, I've got plenty of questions for him, and I'm sure after my last interview with him, he'll be back at some point, but he probably needs a little break from me. So I appreciate you coming on. If folks want to learn more about Inshur, sign up to get a quote, get a policy. I like that you mentioned the newsletter. It sounds like there's a lot of opportunities. Where should they go?
Inshur.com, INSHUR. Check us out. We're coming to a state near you. So thanks for having me, Harry. This has been a blast.
All right, Dan, take care.
Thank you. Bye.